Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Sandy Hook, Liability and Special Education. The information presented by the expert is not to be used as legal advice and does not indicate a working relationship with the expert. All materials obtained from this presentation are merely for educational purposes and should not be used in a court of law, sans the expert's consent, i.e. a business relationship where she or he is hired for your particular case. In today's webinar, Dale Yeager will discuss high liability issues with the management of special needs students, inaccurate understanding of federal law regarding special education, safety issues, a management issue, poor management of students, the real problem. To give you a little background about our presenter, Dale Yeager is a forensic profiler and Federal SME with training by the United States Department of Justice and Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Mr. Yeager is a frequent expert with media outlets, including a featured episode of Forensic Files and a History Channel series entitled True Monsters. Dale is also a federal law enforcement instructor and SME for the high-intensity drug trafficking areas and Middle Atlantic Great Lakes Organized Crime Law Enforcement Network programs. Attendees who require passcode, the word for today is special. During the Q&A session, we ask that you enter this passcode into the Q&A widget for CLE reporting purposes. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Please remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, you must log onto your computer as yourself and stay for the full 60 minutes. You are also required to complete the survey at the end of the program. Please note that CLE credit cannot be given to those watching together on a single computer. Tomorrow morning, we will send out an email with a link to the archived recording of the webinar. The slides can be downloaded from the resource list at the bottom of your screen. Thank you all for attending today, and Dale, the presentation is now turned over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So some of you may be asking what a forensic profiler is doing talking about special education law. Well, back in 1980, I did my student teaching juniors and seniors American history, civics, and world cultures. And so I was a teacher. In fact, that was my major in college. And then in the late 80s, I was asked to do a security assessment for Baltimore City schools, and that had never been done before, and without knowing it, had invented the first school security management audit in the U.S. Since that time, we have 30,000 school clients throughout the U.S. We work in other countries, primarily in Canada. And so this is something that is near and dear to our heart. And over the years, we have become experts in IDEA because I only hire school administrators as executives for my education division. And so today we're going to be talking about things not from a theoretical perspective, but from an actual practical perspective, because we've been doing this for 20 years. If you are a defense attorney defending a school system, private or public, this is going to be very relevant to you. If you're a plaintiff attorney, this is also going to be relevant to you. So I'm going to talk to both of you during this presentation. So first, let's talk about the title, Sandy Hook. Back in 2000, after Columbine, the White House asked us to design a report on the state of school safety in American schools, which we did. We ended up doing 3 reports from 2000 to 2007 for the White House and the U.S. Senate. And about 2 years ago, we were asked again to do another report on Sandy Hook. What we found was very disturbing. 6 to 7 times when the school system violated IDEA. We submitted this information, and as you can imagine, it's become a political football. The problem is that people do not understand IDEA, and I'm going to explain more about that. And the other problem is that many attorneys are using expert witnesses who are problematic, to be kind, to say it bluntly. They don't know what they're doing. Recently, TASA and the legal intelligentsia asked me to put a panel together about expert witnesses. And in that panel, I made a statement, a very provocative statement, and I said, to the attorneys present. There was a large room full of attorneys. I said 80% of expert witnesses, in my professional opinion, shouldn't be working. And of course, I got smiles and some chuckles. And when we were done, the panel that I had assembled, when I had done moderating it, I asked the question again by show of hands, how many of you believe that my 80% is realistic? And it looked like a wheat field in there. One of the things I'm going to talk about today is not just this law and some of the issues, but also in choosing an expert witness in this field. It's very important that you understand the parameters that you need to use, which are very narrow. Let's talk about, though, the liability issues. In 2009, the U.S. Department of Education estimated that over the next 5 years, 60% of all K-12 students will be special needs. We're approaching that number. Their models are pretty good, fairly accurate, and we're getting to a point now where this is happening. The other problem occurred several years ago when someone in Washington, D.C. decided to revamp the definition for ADA. Americans with Disabilities Act actually affects IDEA. And what happened when they revamped the definitions for ADA compliance, they ended up making something like 73% of all Americans basically having special needs or disabilities. That's why in the last several years you've noticed an incredible increase in federal payments to people for disabilities. And this is a serious issue. Sometimes it's better to leave things alone. The next thing that occurred is the fastest growing student disability is autism. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I'm not going to get into the scientific models. It's actually been studied on 3 occasions correctly and scientifically. Of course, people don't like the results because it points to a lot of personal behavior issues, but it is a serious issue, and now they're finding combinations of other things along with the autism. Next, juveniles account for 1/3 of all sex offenders. Female juveniles are the fastest growing group of sex offenders and committing sex offenses. In fact, in the last 4 years in the United States, the female juveniles are the fastest growing group of sex offenders, but the most disturbing thing is that they first offend when they're babysitting. And National Public Radio did a 4-part series about 6 years ago on this issue, and it was really well done. And what they talked about was the problem with violent juvenile females, that we don't have a system in place to handle them. And they're absolutely right. And this is a serious matter, and both you as a defense attorney and as a plaintiff attorney need to understand what's going on within the country in this area. Because when you look at sex offenses committed against students in public and private schools, according to the Department of Education, around 80–85% of those students are special needs. Very important to understand that part. Lack of accurate understanding of federal law regarding special education. I get aggravated because, on a personal note, my brother and sister are both special needs, very severely disabled. And I watched the process my parents went through dealing with schools, and this was back in the day, I should say. But ultimately, it's a very frustrating situation as a parent, and some of you have parents. Some of you are parents of children with special needs, and so you understand what I'm talking about. But what frustrates me the most is because we deal with school administrators, special education directors, and school board members, one of the things that frustrates all of us here is the fact that they're very much behind the 8 ball when it comes to understanding IDEA. When we quiz them, most of these administrators and school board members and special education directors are usually a year to a year and a half behind on updates. Now, there's some reason for that. Some of it is just a lack of professionalism and laziness, and that happens a lot, by the way. A lot of it is because when you do the assessment of the special education department, what you find is that most special education directors are getting their information from their state Department of Education. Well, that's a problem. I'm going to tell you why that's a problem. All 50 states are usually in conflict with federal IDEA law, with their own laws governing special education students. And that's a problem For example, in New Jersey, we have the HIB law. So this is harassment, intimidating, and bullying law. This came out many years ago, and I was asked by the Department of Ed in New Jersey to speak at the conference when they announced this thing, to talk about bullying myths. And one of the problems was that the HIB law violates federal law. And as all of you know as attorneys, the Fed generally trumps everything on a state or local level. And in this case, they're in conflict with each other because someone in New Jersey decided to use adult civil rights law and apply it to children. And it's caused nothing but chaos and a lot of problems. And so what happens is that state departments of education, we find, will take and modify much of the updates in their explanations to their members, to their school districts in that state, and basically give them wrong information. The other issue that bothers all of us here is the issue of board attorneys. And if you're a board attorney, please bear with me while I say this. Board attorneys generally are not briefed correctly on IDEA law. And most of the law firms that we've dealt with in both public and private schools do not understand IDEA. They don't have someone that is spending a large amount of time keeping up on updates. They're certainly not going to Washington, D.C., which is something we do frequently. Some things you can't do over the internet. And so there's just this educational disconnect and people being unaware within these school systems. Procedural safeguards. In many cases, they don't even understand what this means. And that brings up another issue, which is the climate assessment. When I've said this to school board members, to school administrators, and special ed directors, they look at me like I have three heads. They go, what do you mean a climate assessment? And I said, the U.S. Department of Education requires you to have a climate assessment on a yearly basis of your special education department. So what is that? Well, in simple terms, it's a management audit of your special ed department. How are you getting your updates? How are you training your staff? How are you applying the updates? Are you updating the board? You know, all of those things. And I will tell you that they constantly fail for a number of reasons. And so when it comes to safeguards, putting procedural safeguards in place to protect these students, they just don't exist. There's a lot of talk and very little action, and that's the sad reality. Local school policies that violate state and federal laws. Well, I mentioned New Jersey, but every state has these problems. A lot of times when you put the state special needs students laws up against the federal IDEA law, the conflicts are very obvious. And this creates a problem. And that's why, by the way, most litigators, most plaintiff attorneys are not going to Superior Court anymore if they represent a student. They're going federal and making it a civil rights act. First of all, the U.S. Department of Education and Justice Department are going to monitor any kind of civil rights action put into federal courts. This is something they do constantly. So you get on their radar. It also moves the case along faster because federal judges will set shorter start times for court trials that are civil rights violations for children. So this is a big issue that both sides need to understand. Safety issues. So let's go into the safety problem. So we have a saying here, a well-managed school is a safe school. I can drive up to a school. I don't do this anymore. I have teams of people that do it. But back when I was doing this, I could drive up to a school, sit there for 2-3 minutes and tell you how good the principal was. Because by watching the movement of students, the movement of people, the management of the exterior of the school, you can tell a lot about the principal and how well that he or she controls their people, manages their people, and shows leadership. So let's talk about this leadership issue. Some of you may know who Dr. Peter Drucker was. He is the foundation of all things leadership and management. I was his student for 15 years. I'm very proud of that. And one of the things that Dr. Drucker used to drive home to us over and over again, you manage what you can measure. And I will tell you that most schools, a large portion of them, do not have a formal measuring tool to determine whether their policies and procedures are actually working or not when it comes to student safety. And as an expert witness and having a team of expert witnesses that work on these cases, we see this over and over and over again. If you go to a casino, let me give you an example. If you go to a casino, you will notice a well-managed business. When you're sitting there playing blackjack, the dealer is being watched by the pit boss by the floor boss by the regional. Everybody's watching everybody and holding each other accountable. And that is the way management should be done. And that's not micromanagement, that's management. The problem in schools today, both public and private, and I keep mentioning private because about 25% of our schools are private schools. And I will tell you, they have just as many problems as the public schools. They're just very good at hiding it, and that's a problem unto itself. But the issue of leadership, showing leadership, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we started to see a major shift. In fact, USDOJ started researching this and discussing it. More and more principals were younger and younger. This has been happening now for a little over 10 years, significantly younger, to the point where the average principal went from being 40 to being 30. The problem is that while they get a certification from the state to be principals, to be school administrators, no one has taught them any management skills. So let's say you have an elementary school with 800 students in it. That's a small village. I mean, in practical terms, you're managing a small village. You need to know about budgets. You need to know about a myriad of things. You would be shocked to see the amount of emails we receive every single day, including weekends, from new principals saying, I need to get training. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm too embarrassed to say it. This goes on every single day. And the problem is that school systems are not training these principals and giving them management skills. In fact, one of our biggest training programs is a school administrator management training program. It's not about school safety. It's just about teaching them how to manage. So one of the problems with special education staff is they're not trained very well. And they're certainly not trained in school safety and emergency management. What they're trained in is, well, here's the new updates, here's how you fill out the paperwork. No one is teaching them the specifics. And let's focus for a moment on emergency management. 15 years ago, the big question in school safety was, what do you do with the child who's in an electric wheelchair that weighs 400 pounds and you have to evacuate the building? How do you get them out? Do they go out first? Do they go out last? That was the common question that people would talk about. Now, in the past 10 years, the question is, and that nobody is asking is, well, what do you do with special needs children? If a child has autism, and there's a spectrum of autism, from Asperger's, which they're now revamping the definition of to a certain degree, to severe autism. But depending on the scale, where they are in that scale, for lack of a better term, they will lose their ability to stay calm. They will go into a fetal position on the floor. They will scream, punch, kick when there is fear. When an alarm goes off, a bell goes off, they hear children yelling in the hallway. And I will tell you that very few, if any, school systems actually sit down every year, like they're required to by law, and review their emergency management plan and put a whole section in there specifically about special needs children. And if you're a plaintiff attorney representing a student, this is a place to look. Do they even have a special needs section of their emergency management plan? Because I will tell you, you have to be trained how to speak to the unconscious mind of a child who has a mental deficiency to get them to calm down enough to control them and move them out of the building. It is not a matter of just herding them out like you do in a fire drill. And this is a problem that constantly occurs because no one is thinking this way. Fire rescue doesn't think this way. They don't understand schools. They understand emergency evacuation. They understand mobility issues, but they don't understand mental issues. So emergency plans are lacking in this area. The other issue is that where's the management plan? And that's why the U.S. Department of Education requires a climate assessment. Do you have a plan, a management plan for your special education teachers, for your department? Where's the plan? How many times a month do you update your people on new changes that are occurring? One of the questions within IDEA, one of the questions I ask special education directors when I'm training them is, how many of you know about what happened in New York City with the IDEA ruling? And they look and they don't know. They have no idea. This only happened a few months ago. Most significant court ruling in the United States where a special needs student filed a complaint to an attorney against the New York City school system, and they won. And the U.S. Department of Education was involved. It's a significant event, and mainly because they put no procedural plan of action in place to resolve an issue with this poor girl. And it's a really sad story. So ultimately, you better know that, because that certainly affects how you deal with lawsuits as a defense attorney or as a board attorney representing a school system. The policy updates. How do you get your policy updates? Again, the problem is very simple. If you're getting them just from the State Department of Education, that's a no-no. That's bad. And as a defense attorney, you need to change this. You need to update this. You need to mentor yourself, if nothing else, about these laws and about how you get these policy updates and what the significance of policies updates are. Because when something changes on a state or federal level, your plan of action, your management plan for your special ed department better change with it. That just makes logical sense. How do you train your people? And by the way, if you're only training special education teachers in the new updates on IDEA, that leaves out the majority of the staff. How are they getting updated? What if they make a mistake? What if they don't understand the rules? Most people don't realize that under IDEA, if any staff member of any school writes a letter and submits it to the leadership, in this case the principal, and says, I think Johnny Smith has these issues and Johnny Smith should be evaluated under IDEA, by law, they're required to take action on that. Doesn't have to be a teacher. And so this is important to understand. Most of the school administrators and school board members don't even know this. Moving on. Poor management of students, the real problem. I always ask the question, which is a silly question, how many of you have security cameras? And people raise their hands. I said, how many of you have security cameras with cognitive function and peripheral vision? Everybody laughs. I go, what's the only thing that has cognitive function and peripheral vision? And they all say human beings. Cameras cannot do what humans can do. In fact, too many cameras put into a school system actually makes it less safe. I'll give an example. When Columbine occurred, everybody felt sorry for Columbine, so they started donating money and donating things, and I'm just still offended by this, but 6 months after the crime was committed, they installed $1 million in security equipment in that high school. $1 million, which is just a ridiculous waste of money and just shows the emotional overreaction, not the professional response, but an emotional reaction to the crime. Well, you can look it up on Google News. It was covered in USA Today. Kid walks through the $1 million worth of security equipment with a loaded 9mm 6 months to the day of the crime. Now, the reason why the metal detectors didn't pick up the gun is because the principal told the people in the office not to turn off the metal detectors to save on electricity after 10 a.m. They had not been trained in how to do security management. They didn't understand. They were thinking like teachers. They were thinking like educators. And that's fine. But the bottom line is that the only reason why that was avoided was because of an SRO, a school resource officer, that was able to detain this student. This is an example of the problem. Management is done by human beings, not equipment. For example, during the holidays a few months ago, you were with your family, most likely, and you took a family photo of some type, especially around Christmas or Hanukkah. The problem is that that photo, and bear with me, the photo is a lie. Because the photo doesn't tell you what happened before the photo was taken or after the photo was taken. Probably before that photo was taken, you were arguing about politics or some silly matter, sports or something like that. Then mom yelled, "Everybody stop, please stop, I want to get a nice photo." You took a photo and then you went back to arguing. So the same is true of video. Video is never accurate because it doesn't tell you what happened before or after. It's only a snippet. We know many, many people who have gotten injured or have been accused wrongly of crimes because a snippet of video was seen out of context. But let's talk about this IEP issue. Individual Education Plan, an IEP is a very important part of IDEA. And many people do not understand what when you're supposed to use it, how you're supposed to design it. I have personally seen 4 times when I've sat in IEP meetings and watched special ed directors doze off and take a nap while people briefed others. I mean, you talk about unprofessional behavior. I've seen IEPs that were a disgrace. And I'm not an attorney, but I know this law very well, and my people know it even better than me, and we just shake our heads. The behavioral manifestation determination is the key element of an IEP. And let me tell you something. I know we talk politically about this issue of, well, you know, Washington has all these laws, but IDEA is actually a very good law, and it was well thought out. And Democrats and Republicans were a part of the design of this plan, of this law, and it has its issues, but generally it really, when it's used correctly, it really does help students to progress. And the behavioral manifestation determination is a very important part of IDEA because it determines how you're going to put together the education plan, and to make that active, not just passive, make that active to make sure the child is progressing. Interestingly, the Supreme Court has or just heard recently, I watched it on C-SPAN, a case where a county school system is suing, and they're actually being sued, and their counterclaim, which I found ridiculous, is, well, the law IDEA is vague. It says you have to have a plan, but doesn't say that you have to actually act on it. I just sat there watching my TV, just shaking my head. I think that's kind of ridiculous. So ultimately, the law is very clear about this, and if people aren't clear, all you have to do is pick up a phone, call the U.S. Department of Education. They're actually fairly nice people. They answer your questions. But this issue is a big one. If you are a plaintiff attorney, you have a pending action or an action against the school system, you need to understand this piece. And I can tell you right now that most expert witnesses that claim to be IDEA experts do not understand this piece. The next is the information disconnect. A lot of times when an IEP is put together, the document is not integrated into every aspect of that student's life within the school system. And if you're a board attorney, you need to investigate this. You're the gatekeeper to protect the board, to protect the school or the school system from liability. And this information disconnect is a key element that we see over and over again in cases we work on. And by the way, we work for schools and we work on cases that are, against schools. So we work both sides depending on the case. The next is poor assessments, physical disability versus a personality disorder. This is an issue that is came up during the Obama administration. It's coming up again under the Trump administration. A physical disability versus a personality disorder. A personality disorder, like sociopathic or psychopathic behavior, is not a mental illness. Now, I know some of you are going to say, oh, Dale, that's ridiculous. My professor in college told me that. Well, I hate to tell you, but your professor is wrong, and I'm qualified to say that. Personality disorder is someone who is angry, and they are self-centered and narcissistic. They take action against people, but to say that they're mentally ill is ridiculous. And this is a problem because when IDEA was implemented, we had a lot of general psychologists who didn't understand a lot of these issues, and they lumped personality disorders together with mental illness. Schizophrenia is a mental illness. Autism is a mental defect of the brain, but they cannot be compared to nasty children who act out violently or aggressively or manipulative. That's a personality disorder. Two different animals. Physical disabilities, like a mobility issue, some type of a disease that affects the brain, mental retardation, whatever it happens to be, that's completely different because it's a defect from birth. Even bipolar disorder, and some of you are going to have an issue with what I'm going to say, but I'm here to try to educate you. Take a look at the recent research on this disorder, because there is really little to no evidence that it's genetic, number one, and number two, that it's somehow a mental disorder that is a defect of the brain. In fact, the really good studies that are done with empirical data, done correctly, theorize, and I agree with them, it's not definitive yet, but they theorize that this is trauma around the age of 3, 4, right in those developmental years, a little older for girls. Remember, bipolar disorder was originally called manic depression, discovered back in the 30s, the same time almost every mental illness was discovered. They studied it very well, but the recent studies really are saying the same thing that were said in the 1930s. So this is a problem. And if you're a plaintiff attorney, you need to understand these issues, because they're going to come up when one side has an expert and the other side has a medical expert, and they may be in conflict with each other, because the problem now is, and you all need to know this, in the last 15 years or so, sociology and psychology specifically have moved away from an empirical scientific model to a consensus model. And this is a problem for the Daubert standard. Here in Pennsylvania, we have the older standard, but this is a problem for the Daubert standard, because the Daubert standard never assumed, never even imagined when they put this together, that there was going to be a time when people wouldn't use observable, replicable data, facts, to prove something. So now what we're doing is we're making public policy, we're making school policy and psychological assessment based on theory and people all agreeing on the same bad idea. And this is an issue that you need to address as a school system attorney as well as a plaintiff attorney. There is a problem here. And in Washington, there is talk, during the Obama administration, Arne Duncan talked about separating personality disorder from IDEA and making it a separate entity, which means those children would be more mainstream than they are now. They would not receive special handling. This would be a completely different thing. So these things can come up and blindside you as an attorney. You need to know about them. Lastly, parents and disability assessments, not my child. One of the things we find is that many parents will not allow a school system to have assessment of their children. So let's go back to Sandy Hook. No one knows what Adam Lanza had. You know, people say he had autism. Nobody can definitively say that, because the problem is he was never medically assessed. No one ever did a blood test. No one ever did a full physical on him. There was a diagnosis done by God knows who, but the problem was nobody knows. And that's a problem, because that was the responsibility of the school to find qualified people to do it. But here is an issue. When parents say no, that's going to create a problem for your lawsuit. It's going to create a problem as a plaintiff's attorney, as a defense attorney, because no one knows. And I will tell you this, that you have got to have medical professionals involved, not psychologists, medical professionals involved when you assess a child. And there is talk in Washington now of requiring under IDEA that to make that determination of special needs, the child will have to have a full physical with blood work. And I applaud this. All of us here applaud this. You have to first rule out medical causes for a problem before you say, well, it's all psychological or it's a mental disorder. There might be a medical issue, but nobody does this. Everybody tries to fast track the assessments, and that's not helping the children at all. And so when you're dealing with this disability assessment, this is problematic and you need to look into it and understand the process, because that's a big issue. We could spend a whole hour just on that. All right, so this topic usually has a great number of questions. So I would want to answer your questions for you because it's a complicated issue and I want to give us enough time. So do we have any questions out there? Rochelle?
Thanks, Dale. If all the attendees can enter in the passcode for today, the passcode is special. You can enter that and now into the Q&A widget located to the left of your screen. And please write down any questions that you might have for Dale. There is a question: what is the best method you feel special education staff should use to de-escalate a situation involving a special needs student?
Well, that's a general question. I mean, first of all, they need training to do that, and most of the training that we see now is the hugging thing, which doesn't work when the child is, usually middle school level. It works for smaller children. We see a lot of companies out there providing, less than lethal, gentle assessment or gentle restraint of children. The problem is, in many cases, it doesn't work, and we're hearing that from the special education teachers that we train, especially when you got a junior high or high school student that's 6'3" and weighs 200 pounds, and the teacher is 5'3", $120. So it all depends. It always starts with the verbal. Well, let me go back. One of the things that we teach is how a special needs classroom should be set up for safety and to limit aggression. One of the problems that we find is that when you put special needs children in a, just bear with me, this is important. When you put them in a low ceiling room, they feel compressed, and it does create problems. So a low ceiling would be a California style school. They were built in the 1950s. It's a flat roof type school. So just the environment of the classroom can create aggression. So being conscious of that can reduce it. And then secondly is the verbal skills to get into the unconscious mind, the key words, the code words, knowing how to interact with the child based on the condition the child has. And then lastly is the physical restraint, which every state allows teachers to do. The problem is that, again, you have to be trained to do that. You can't have the local karate instructor come and teach that. It's a specialty type of skill, and it requires practice to be good at it. I wish I could give you something more specific, but that's my answer, is those three pieces, those three elements.
Next question. In regard to juvenile females committing more sex offenses, how dramatic is the increase in incidents?
Basically, teen males are not growing very much at all. They've kind of plateaued in the last 5 years. And if you look at the charts for juvenile females, it looks like a rocket going to the moon. It's dramatic. It's dramatic. It's when you look at it per capita, it's incredible increase of 40% in 5 years, and it's not slowing down at all. There's a lot of reasons for it, but it's a serious problem. And law enforcement knows about this, and social services know about it, but there is, again, an information disconnect between these trends and school officials and school staff, because they don't really get training on these things. That's the big part of the problem. The training that's available is pretty sad. It's incomplete, and it's by people that don't even understand the issues. So it's dramatic. In answer to your question, it's dramatic increase, dramatic rise.
Next question. What percentage of litigation is resolved or settled in favor of the plaintiff?
I'm sorry, repeat the question again?
Sure. What percentage of litigation is resolved or settled in favor of the plaintiff?
Of the plaintiff?
Yes.
In our experience, and with TASA, I mean, we've been with TASA for, 8 years? We've done, probably 200 cases plus related to special education. And I can only tell you what our experience has been, but that's a pretty good sampling from a scientific perspective. In those cases, about 80% in the plaintiff's favor. But here's the problem. You mentioned two things. Whoever asked the question, you're mentioning two things, and they're two different things. One is, did a court decide? The other is, did it get settled in their favor? Well, a lot of times schools, for those of you who are attorneys, let me just, and if you know this already, I apologize. Schools are insured generally through subfunds. So a subfund is a specialty insurance fund for a special type of industry, in this case, an LEA, a local education organization. And so subfunds are usually run through school board insurance groups, that type of thing. Some schools do have their own private policies, but generally these policies are run through subfunds. Subfunds are designed so that everybody shares the loss, everybody shares the win. So you have 100, just to use a number, you have 100 school districts in a subfund, and everybody puts their money in, you pay out, whatever's left at the end of the year, they generally will disperse back to the members. So by diversifying the liability, the risk, it makes it more affordable for schools to have this kind of insurance. I have sat in those meetings many times with insurance subfunds, and they generally will discuss it. They'll look at the cost of litigation, and they'll settle. So a lot of times they settle not because the school is guilty, but because they just don't want the cost. Now, in where a judge makes a determination, or a jury, which is unusual, but when they make a determination, that reduces it. I've seen that reduce, when it goes to court, it actually reduces to about 60% in favor of a plaintiff. But those are rare. Rarely do these things go to court. I think some of them should, but again, you know, as attorneys, you know that you have to make sure that you think about your client and think about costs. So that would be my answer to that.
Next question. You mentioned taking children with personality disorders out of the special education classrooms. How do you feel it will affect the student and their new classmates in that new setting?
Well, we're torn because we advise the U.S. Department of Education. We're recommended subject matter expert by them on Title IX and IDEA. And, you know, I'm in Washington, D.C. more than I'm home. And we were asked about this several years ago, and then recently asked about it. And we said, well, we're torn. In one side of it, we think it's a good idea because children with personality disorders shouldn't be in the same setting as children with actual mental disabilities. I think it affects them. Professionally, I think it affects them and affects their ability to heal, to become stable, back to healthy, I call it. But on the other hand, taking them out of special education and fully mainstream them will dramatically increase violence. This is obvious. We see this all the time. And with 30,000 school clients that are suburban, rural, and urban, we can safely say that's an accurate assessment. We have a pretty good sample. And that's going to dramatically increase it. But ultimately, it's a money issue, it's a litigation issue, and the problem is that more and more models are agreeing with us as a team that putting children together with various issues like that, neither one is benefiting from that. Because in most cases, children with personality disorders are the ones committing the crimes against other students. And so, you know, I'm kind of torn. I don't know. It would have to be implemented, that kind of a change. If they make that change on a federal basis, that would have to be implemented on in a very careful way. I wouldn't want to be on that committee. So that's my answer to that.
Question. How often do you think staff needs training since procedures change so frequently?
We recommend that since teachers are 9-month employees, they need to be briefed, physically briefed, not on a paper, not in a memo, but physically briefed on a monthly basis. Those meetings don't have to be long. We've shown special ed directors how to do it in 15, 20 minutes. They need at least 2 significant training sessions per year, one in August before the school year starts, also one in the beginning of the new year at some point. Now, administrators, school board members, they should be at the beginning of the school year in August when they have their retreats. That should be a significant portion of their training in their retreats. They should be trained in understanding these laws, what the updates are, all the implications. So that would be my answer to that. That's what we recommend to our client school systems.
Thank you, Dale. We have no more questions as of yet, but if you could just continue on with the presentation.
Sure.
If possible.
Well,
okay, thank you.
Okay, nope, not a problem. So one of the recent issues that is coming up is the issue of LGBT, and this is an issue that really started in New Jersey many years ago with the HIB law, because the HIB law, harassment, intimidation, bullying, was originally designed to deal with bullying, and then there were political people that had agendas, which they have a right to do, and they got a hold of this thing and started to add the rights of LGBT students. And now what's happening is that more and more school administrators are finding the whole thing problematic. And if you're a plaintiff attorney representing a student, or if you're a defense attorney, a board attorney representing a school board, school system, you need to look into this issue very clearly. And you need to look at resources that are not political. And that's difficult, because when you're talking about the science behind all of this, when you're talking about students who are gay, bisexual, transgendered, when you look at the scientific facts and the scientific studies, you start to see some disturbing trends. For example, in New York City, there was if you remember several years ago, they decided to set up a high school for children who were, students who were gay, bisexual, because of bullying and harassment. And the problem was that the public really didn't understand what was really going on there. First of all, the bullying against gay students was, the majority of the reports showed that it was by other gay students. And this is something that nobody wants to talk about. But the problem escalated to something out of control, which was kept very quiet by the mayor's office and the city of New York. This high school that they set up to be a haven against bullying and harassment has become one of the most violent high schools in the city. And there was actually a report issued, which you can get from the city of New York. It is public, about this issue. And what it found was that there was a higher amount of sexual violence between same-sex couples that were juveniles, and also more bullying and harassment. And this coincides, by the way, this correlates to information that we all know that work in forensics and crime. And I work in not forensics like crime scene forensics. I work in psychological forensics and that type of thing. And one of the things I teach for the Department of Justice is sex crime investigation. And I'm one of the 6 people that teaches that in North America, actually, for the Justice Department. And so one of the things that we've known for many years, and really didn't come out until the last 2 years of the Obama administration, when the FBI director asked for a change in the policy, is the disproportionate amount of domestic violence by gay couples against each other. And this certainly correlates with juveniles. So the gender issue or the sexual orientation issue really comes up when you're talking about special education students, because, for example, my brother is deaf since birth. And one of the things that is something that people don't really truly understand. It's been studied, but no one has any conclusive evidence or a conclusion about it, why it happens. But within the deaf community, a large, significant portion of disproportionate to the rest of the United States, disproportionate amount of deaf students are gay. And so this is something that goes on quite a bit. This is something that's been well studied, but no one understands the reason for it. And in the deaf community, there is a great deal of domestic violence among couples, just like there is in non-disabled community. So this issue of gender, this issue of sexual orientation plays a role in these lawsuits, and more it's going to play a role because people are pushing this aggressively on a state and federal level, and it's problematic. You know, it's problematic, and you have to be dispassionate about it, which we are very adamant about doing here, and really take a look at the issue holistically as an attorney, and I mean holistically with a W. Look at the big picture here, because you can be blindsided by some facts that will kill your case or go against your client. And so I just wanted to throw that in there as I was thinking about this issue. This is an important issue to address. So, Rochelle, do we have any other questions?
We do not at this time.
Oh, okay. Well, what I'll do is do a little wrap up for you. Usually there's a lot of questions on this subject. So it is very important that if you are a plaintiff attorney, I'm going to give you 3 things that you need to be focused on. If you're a plaintiff attorney representing a student, or if you're on defense representing a school system, you need to first look at the discrepancy between state and federal law regarding special needs students. And one of the things I had talked about in the first part of this was the expert witness. So I'll delve into that a little more in detail, so I'm glad we have some extra time here. Hopefully you've come away from this presentation saying to yourself, wow, I really need an expert witness that knows this subject 100%, not partially. And let me give you an example of problems that we've seen. So Sally Smith was a school superintendent. She has an ED doctorate in education. She's had a distinguished career for 25 years. She's retired now, wants to make some extra money, has decided to become an expert witness. Well, here's the problem. The problem was that superintendents don't deal with special education generally. They deal with budgets. They're there to keep control of their principals, and then on the other side of that is to keep the board happy. And so superintendents are basically CEOs. That's really a better term for them. And if you know anything about CEOs in corporations, they don't get involved in the minutia of everyday aspects of the company. So one of the problems that we see is that sometimes superintendents, school administrators don't make very good expert witnesses because they don't understand all of the issues that have been going on the last 10 years. They've been managing school systems. And they don't keep up on the updates. I do have school administrators that work for me, but they bring to the table real life experience. They worked as special ed directors. They ran special ed programs as well as being school superintendents. So they're unique. The other thing is they go through a training program. So before I let them do anything with TASA or any other organization, in any cases, they have to be trained, and I train them. So they have to come up to my standards, and then they run with that, and they become really extraordinary on their own, going much further than I have. When you're picking an expert witness, don't just get caught up in titles, get caught up in educational qualifications, because in the end, can they assess all the documents, all the discovery? You know, that's the question. Can they assess it and give you the tools you need to win or defend your client? The other problem is that can they write interrogatories? An expert witness should be able to write interrogatories. They should be assisting you with that. You don't bring expert witnesses in after the case is 3/4 done. You know, when we do cases, we generally come in early because we help with the interrogatories. We know what to ask for. We secondly help with the discovery documents because we know things to ask for that most attorneys wouldn't think of. And you have to be unique to do IDEA cases, to do school cases. You have to understand school law, you have to understand IDEA, you have to understand how a school operates. I've actually had education expert witnesses get angry with me, send me nasty emails, and say, you know, you condemn us, most of us shouldn't be working. And I go, well, let me ask you a question. I said, why is a master schedule so important in a lawsuit? And they can't answer the question. Well, if you can't answer that question, then you shouldn't be an expert witness. And by the way, the master schedule is the first thing that the Department of Education Washington asks you for, because by looking at that, they can tell how well your school is managed. They can tell how good you are at managing your school. So knowing these things, a lot of expert witnesses that do this don't even know what an LEA stands for. That's a local education agency. So you have to know your subject. So first is checking out, look at the state and federal laws. Are they in conflict with each other? Secondly, ask yourself the question, what isn't in the papers? You know, when you get all these documents in discovery, or the client has given you information, remember that when parents who are very emotional, when parents are trying to fight for their kids, they can become illogical and they can also be deceptive. So if you're a plaintiff attorney, you better ask that question to yourself. What am I missing here? What are they not telling me? And if you're defending a school system, you also need to ask, what isn't in here? What is possibly being hidden? The third thing I would tell you that you need to be doing on the subject of IDEA is actually getting on the U.S. Department of Education website, tell them that you want them to send their newsletters, and then actually read them. Read those newsletters, read those news updates. They send them by email. You can read them on your phone. Stay current. Don't just depend on expert witnesses. You stay current if you're doing these kind of cases and know the subject very well, inside and out. And so I would say that those are really the three key issues to take away from the webinar. And then, you know, I would say too that if you've got a case that you have contemplated action, you're involved in a case against a school system, make sure you contact TASA to talk about help with the case. Many times, you know, you're going to be stuck on an important issue, and that's where the expert witnesses come in. And also, expert witnesses they should not just be writing a report and doing a deposition and possible testimony. Those kind of experts always bother me because that's not what an expert witness should be. An expert witness should also be a consultant. They should be able to educate you as an attorney. If you're educating an expert witness, that's a problem because you're teaching them how to be an expert witness. They should already have most of that when they bring that to the table. The other thing too on reports, real quickly, as we're winding down, I find that many experts write either reports that are too short or reports that look like a Harry Potter novel. We write reports, we've always written reports, and I teach my experts to write reports that judges would read, that people would actually read. So there's a lot of what I call USA Today formatting. The idea is to make it simple, easy to read, bulleted points, source everything, but make it readable. Make it a narrative that people can understand and read. So those are the thoughts I would leave with you. And in the end, ultimately, folks, this is about human lives. Never forget that. Never forget that. This is about children's lives. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Dale. Everyone, just to let you know that Dale will be presenting a webinar on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have not registered as of yet, you can register. If you have any questions, you can just let me know. Also, just remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, that you must attend for the full 60 minutes of this presentation, and you're also required to complete the survey at the end of the program. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and most especially Dale Yeager for his time and effort in creating this presentation. If you would like to speak with Dale, or if you would like to speak with a TASA representative regarding an expert witness for a case you are currently working on, please contact TASA at 1-800-523-2319. One of my colleagues will be following up with you regarding your feedback on today's presentation. Thank you all for attending. This concludes our presentation for today.
Take care, everyone.